Welcome to JonGetsGames. Today I'll be reviewing World's Fair 1893. In this 2 to 4 player game, you are trying to get the World's Fair off the ground, and you're going to do that by sending your supporters to the 5 different regions of the board. And not only do you want to have the most supporters in that region, but the location you go to is going to dictate the cards you pull into your hand, and these are going to be pending exhibits as well as the influential people of the time trying to move things around in your favor. First I'll show you how the game plays, and then I'll jump into my review. Here's a starting setup for a 4-player game of World's Fair 1893. There are 5 different locations that go around the central Ferris wheel, and they are randomly associated for each game, and then each player has 1 or 2 support cubes put on each of these zones. The structure of a turn is quite simple. The player will take one of their supporter cubes from their pile and then add it to one of these 5 zones on the board. And then they look in front of them to see if they have any personality cards which they grabbed on a previous turn. If they do, then they must evaluate each of them in any order they want right now. You can ignore everything on the card except for the symbols in the corners. This shows you what the effect of that card is. In this case, you get to add an extra cube to the location you just put a cube in. So the purple player would add another supporter to this red zone here and then discard this card. And then this Cyrus McCormick Jr. card will add another supporter to the green zone. So they'll take a supporter and slide it in there and move on with the rest of their turn. Now that they've evaluated and discarded all of the personality cards they had, they're going to take all the cards that were face up in the zone they initially put their supporter cube down into. For every midway ticket a player takes, they'll move the cart forward once on the midway Ferris wheel, and this is the timer for the game. Once this cart makes it all the way down to the bottom, we will do a scoring. And lastly, we need to reseed the board with 3 new cards from the top of the deck. We're going to begin with the zone that has no cards because it was just taken from in this turn, and then we're going to go clockwise around the board, filling these cards in one at a time. It's important to note that some zones have 3 arrows and some have 4. This is the maximum number of cards that that specific zone can have, so on a future turn, you cannot put a new card into a zone that's full. You just keep going clockwise and put it into the next one that is available. So let's go ahead and fast forward all the way to a scoring round, and this is going to happen at the end of the turn in which a player took the midway card that brought us to the very bottom of this wheel. Now the first thing that we do in a scoring is we look down here and we move the scoring tracker forward once to show that we are now evaluating the first scoring of the game, and there will be 3 total. Next, we look at the number of midway tickets that players have taken, and the person who took the most is going to get a bonus of 2 points. Now you notice that the gold and purple player both have 5 tickets, and it is a friendly tie. So they both get 2 bonus points. Now each player cashes out all of their midway tickets and takes victory points equal to the number. So the purple player will get 5 points, and so on for all the players. And now we score each of the areas going around the Ferris wheel, and what we're looking for is the player with the most and second most supporters in a given zone. There are scoring guides for the 2, 3, and 4-player game. So since this is a 4-player game, we can discard these 2 and go off this one. So as you can see, the person with the most support in a region is going to get a 4-point medallion, and the person with the second most support is going to get a 2-point medallion. Then we have these little check marks, and these show you how many of their proposed exhibits can get approved. These colored cards that players have collected by grabbing from around the board as they're playing are proposed exhibits. And if we look down here, we see that the blue player is winning the gray zone. So they get to do 3 approvals on their exhibits. And if we look, we see they have 2 of these gray cards here. Now, cards are worth no points at any point in the game, but when you approve exhibits, you discard these cards here, and you turn them into these approved exhibit tokens at a rate of 1 to 1. The blue player also gets a 4-point first place medal, and the gold player is going to get the second place because they have 3 support in this area, but you'll notice they have no proposed gray cards, so they don't get the benefit of approving anything. We then move clockwise to the yellow electricity zone, and you'll notice that there is actually a tie for first place. And if we look down here, we see that both tied players are going to get a 2-point medal, and then they can approve 2 different proposed exhibits, but you do not award anything for the second place. And lastly, you can see that if there is a tie for second, nobody gets any medals, but everybody who is tied for second is going to get to approve 1 proposed exhibit. Once we've scored all regions, we move into the last step, which is recalling support. Each player is going to lose half of their supporters rounding down, so the gold player would only lose the 1, and we're going to do this in every single region around the board. Once the recall is complete, the scoring is over, and we move on to the next player's turn, and we continue as normal. Once the carriage makes it all the way down to the bottom again, you'll have a second scoring, and then one more time, we'll do the last scoring of the game, and then you go into the final scoring. All cards left over in front of players are worth nothing at the end of the game. The only thing that matters are these approved exhibit scoring tokens. You'll see that for a full set of the 5 different colors, you're going to get 15 points. A set of 4 unique is going to get you 10 points. So if we look here, we have a set of 4 different ones here, so this is worth 10 points. Then we have 3 unique here, so that would be worth 6 points. And then finally, this red one is by itself for a set of 1 for 1 point. You add your approved exhibit score to the number of points you got for first and second places in the majority scoring, and then you also add in your midway tickets. This will be your final score, and the person with the most points is the winner. So now let's begin my review of World's Fair 1893, and we'll start with a couple positive points. The first of these relates to the main decision that you have to make on every single turn of this game. You look out and you know you have to put this one cube down somewhere, and you are weighing the balance of, do I put it in a region where I really need to bolster my support so that I can do better in a scoring, or do I put it in a region that gets me the cards that I really need? And this is a surprisingly interesting decision, because the first time you play the game, it just feels like, oh, just place the cube where you get the most cards. The more cards, the better. But that is not the case in general, because you have to turn these cards into approved exhibits, and these cards are worth nothing at the end of the game. So it's a very interesting balance. Oftentimes you will find yourself putting a supporter down into a spot where you don't even really want to influence that zone, just to take one card, but it's the one card that you need. So you have to balance the number of cards you're taking to the cards you actually need to take to the support you need for those different regions, because you really do need to do well in the scorings. This game is all about the area majority on those spots. Sure, there can be a ton of victory points in getting those exhibits approved, but you can't approve the exhibits unless you are at least in the second place running in these different spots, depending on the player count. So I really appreciate the decisions that the game puts into your head as you are trying to figure out where you're going to put this one little cube on the board. Positive number 2 more closely looks at the scoring of those approved exhibit tiles at the end of the game. You want a variety of these tiles, and what that forces you to do is kind of dance around the overall board, trying to have a majority in this zone and then a majority in that zone. You are not looking to dominate in any one zone. In fact, you kind of want to push and then recede, and the game does that for you by making you lose half of your supporters in every single one of these regions at the scoring. But also, once you've lost those half of your supporters, you're less likely to go back there and try to regain control, because getting more and more of those gray tokens, for instance, is not going to be anywhere near as worth it to you as going into a new zone where you don't have anything, because that brand new tile is going to be worth 5 points if you don't have any of it, versus the 1 point that getting an additional tile for a new set that is just by itself is going to get you. So it forces you to adapt what you're doing throughout the game, as well as look at what your opponents have and try to think, well, first of all, because everything is face up, you know exactly what cards they all have, know exactly how many approved exhibits they have. You could really see, like, is that person going to fight me for the blue zone? They already have 2 blue tokens, and it looks like they really need red, so they're probably going to go for more for red, and you can more safely decide to go into that blue zone. That being said, that person across the table might just happen to take a bunch of cards. One of them is going to give them an extra influence in the blue zone that they didn't really care about, but it's going to add extra pressure onto you. So it's kind of neat how you are just working your way around the board, trying to maximize those sets. It's now time to cover a few neutral points, and the first of these relates to the card draw luck of revealing the cards around the table at the end of your turn, and specifically with relation to those really powerful personality cards and how they can really swing the incentivization of a given spot on the board. If you drop one of those people in a zone that was marginally okay, suddenly that zone becomes amazing, because pretty much all of those people are really good. I suppose the ones that do a specific region's color may or may not be good to a player, but the one that lets you move a cube is super powerful. The one that lets you add a cube to an adjacent spot, super powerful. And then the most powerful one, in my opinion, is the one that makes you put another cube down in the spot you just added to. So you are really bolstering a spot that's kind of like blitzing a zone out of nowhere that your opponents have a hard time really judging. And you know what? Once that guy flops out onto a pile that already has maybe 3 cards in it, it's pretty much a no-brainer. They're going to take that pile and have a really powerful next turn. And you know, that card could have just been another yellow pending exhibit that person wouldn't have wanted. So the card flip luck can really swing things. I've seen, like, not to the point where, like, oh, that person's obviously going to win now, but more just as a person who just finished their turn, you get a bit crestfallen when you see that. And I suppose you could think about what zones are going to get incentivized based off of where you're going to put your supporter down. That's just one more thing to think about, and usually that gets lost in the shuffle between where do I need good support and where are the cards that I really need. You're not really thinking about what the next 3 zones are clockwise around, and that might be a failing of me. And I don't think this hurts the game. It's just something I want to mention, because it's something that I've noticed, that the card draw luck can feel kind of swingy and can sometimes be a bit of a bummer. Neutral point number 2 relates to the production value and theming of the game. It is a beautiful looking game. Like, cards are all awesome. It's wonderful that every single one of the colored cards is a different exhibit. You can look down and read a little bit of the history of the card. It's wonderful. You have this Ferris wheel in the middle of the table. It's a very attractive looking game, but there is like no thematic connection between what you're seeing on the board and what you're actually doing. And I'm not a person who needs strong thematic connection to enjoy a game, but this one is almost pushing it. Like, this is an abstract game. Like, you really, there's nothing to do with the World's Fair. Sure, you have the Ferris wheel in the middle, and it all looks pretty, but you do not feel at all like you are there. You don't feel like you're influencing personalities. You don't feel like you're actually building this World's Fair. So I like that it's beautiful. I love the attention to detail to really try to cram theme in all these corners with a flavor text, but at the end of the day, it's quite disconnected. So let's discuss my one negative to the game, which has to do with the timing of the 3 scoring rounds in the game. Now, this is going to happen once the little midway card goes all the way around and back down to the bottom, but is not necessarily correlated with the number of turns that the players have had. What this means is, especially for that first scoring and in a 4-player game especially, the 3rd and 4th players have a good shot at taking one less turn as the 2nd and 1st players before that first scoring happens. And missing a turn can be a very big deal. It could be the difference between 1st and 2nd, or even the difference between 1st and tied for 3rd or something like that, based on the number of turns that happen in front of you before the scoring actually happens. So it seems like the person who is to the left of the scoring player is in a very disadvantageous position, because not only have several turns happen before it got back to them, but they also maybe have taken less turns in the game in general. And that feels like a problem to me. Like, the person who initiates a score is in a very powerful, dominant position to be able to mess with the board and then activate the scoring so that they are going to be really good. All their cubes are in the best possible positioning and nobody can mess with it before that scoring happens. And I have noticed that the person who scores the most, like maybe one person was in control of 2 out of the 3 scorings, that person seems to win. And it seems like in that situation, that means one person is going to be at the worst end of those 2 scorings, and that person seems to do the worst. And it's also just not fun to be in that position. It's frustrating. And you can say that there is some amount of control you can have by the midway cards that you draft into your area that's going to cause the little cart to go around. But if you decide to not draft midway cards to try and stall things out, well, odds are good your opponents will, because midway cards are worth points. There is area majority for those. If you have the most of those, then you're going to get bonus points as well. So it kind of feels like you may as well take those cards, and it's more dictated by the luck of the draw from that deck. Like, do a bunch of midway cards come out at a certain point, early or middle game, and it seems like somebody's going to be at the positive end and somebody's going to be at the negative end of those, and it does not feel to me strongly that the person at the positive end is there because they played the game better. And that is definitely a potential issue for the game. Now, I've only played the game like 4 or 5 times now, so I think you need a much bigger data set to say something is a big deal, but this is the largest bummer that I've had playing the game. This is the moment where I see somebody having the least amount of fun, is when this happens to them, especially if it happens consistently. When it comes to the replayability of World's Fair 1893, I have to admit it feels a little below average. And the reason for this is it just has a samey vibe to it. Even after you play the game like 2 or 3 times, it does not feel like you are finding new stuff in there. And of course, this is a game where everything is out there on the board. And I will admit that there is a modular board set so that the different colors are not always going to be in the same orientation. And having the Ferris wheel break adjacency for that one personality card does do a little bit of difference to the way the game plays, and a couple of the zones take 3 cards and a couple take 4, but it almost feels like fluff modularity. Like, it's, sure, you could do it and that's fine, but I don't feel like one game plays particularly differently than the other does. And I'm sure if I was very intense about the game, I could potentially see some differences and play around how those adjacencies may or may not play out, but it doesn't feel like it's very strong at all. It kind of just feels like, oh, it's going to look slightly different each time you play it. So I don't think it's a drastic problem for the game, but it's definitely not a strong point. World's Fair 1893 plays 2 to 4 players, and I've played all of those player counts, and I do think that the 4-player game is the best. And I think that simply has to do with the variety of competitions that are going to happen with the area majorities with your supporters, and also the strength of being second place in those spots in a 4-player game. The 2-player game worked, although I don't think it was particularly great. I mean, it really just felt like a tug of war when it came to the supporters in all those zones, because there are no dummy cubes or anything like that. It's just you versus your opponent, who has slightly more or slightly less. So it's much more cut and dry, and I think I would play it again at that player count, but it's definitely not where the game shines. And 3-player was okay. Like, I don't have a problem playing that as well, but 4-player definitely feels strongest, even though it seems like in a 4-player game, the issues I have with the scoring timing are greatest, so that's a bit odd how I can say that, but it does feel like when it comes to the competition in the zones, the 4-player is the most fun to play. In conclusion, I feel like I came into the game with too high of an expectation. I think that J-Alex Kevern is a great designer, and I think that the game looks really good on the table. It has wonderful production quality, and it has the flavor text and theme kind of attempting to really make it pop. But in reality, when I actually played the game, I ended it with a feeling of, oh, that's it? Okay, and then I played it a second time and had a similar feeling, and a third time and a similar feeling, and what that means is I did not dislike the game. In fact, I've enjoyed every play of it that I've done, and everyone I've played with so far has enjoyed the game. But no one I've played with the game with so far has been excited by it. It has been requested to be played again, which is cool, but even the person who requested it was not particularly excited. They were just kind of intrigued to try to get in there and work with those mechanisms and try to do better when they played it next time. And there is some enjoyment there, like trying to understand how to balance your supporters, trying to take the majorities versus trying to take just the right number of cards to do really well with that and really still get a lot of points for those majorities. So it is a fun game. There is good stuff here, but I was expecting a little bit more. I feel like that has hurt the replayability in general, although even though I played this game 4 or 5 times, I do see myself playing it more into the future. I'm not particularly jonesing to get it to the table a lot like originally I thought I was potentially going to do, because this has that incentivization mechanic, which I love in games where the spots on a board that don't get taken get incentivized until somebody finally takes it. And so that was one of the bigger reasons I was very excited to play this game. But even that part of the game didn't end up popping to me so much because it felt like the clockwise mechanism didn't necessarily incentivize the zones that were least attractive. It just kind of happened to incentivize the zones that were next to the zone that I wanted to take. So all these things together make it a good game, an enjoyable game, but not necessarily one that has me or anyone I know excited. I think you should definitely give it a shot if it seems interesting at all to you, but make sure that your expectations are reasonable. If you'd like to see more in-depth board game reviews like this one, as well as full game playthroughs and vlogs, please subscribe to my channel. Also, you can directly support the channel at patreon.com/JonGetsGames. Thanks for watching.